The mop made the same sound it always did against the marble floor. Back and forth. Back and forth. Renata had been doing this for so long that her hands moved on their own now. She did not need to think about it anymore. Her body just knew what to do. It was almost midnight at the Grand Meridian Hotel. The ballroom was empty now. The guests had left hours ago, leaving behind their champagne glasses and dirty napkins and half-eaten plates of expensive food. Renata moved between the tables slowly, collecting what they had abandoned. This was her job. This had been her job for 11 years. She was 62 years old. Her back hurt most days. Her knees were not what they used to be. But she never complained. She came to work on time. She did what was asked of her. And when she went home to her small apartment, she was too tired to feel sorry for herself. Tonight, the ballroom felt different somehow. Quieter. The chandeliers above her head sparkled like frozen stars. The tall windows showed the city lights outside, glowing soft and gold against the dark sky. And in the corner, like it always was, sat the piano. It was a Steinway grand piano, black and shining and beautiful. Renata had polished that piano more times than she could count. She knew every curve of it, every scratch that the guests had put on it over the years. She knew the way the keys felt under a cleaning cloth, but she had not played it. Not once in 11 years. She stopped mopping and looked at it. The piano looked back at her, waiting. Renata set down her mop. She looked around the empty ballroom. There was no one here. The security guard was probably watching television in the back office. The other cleaning staff had already finished their sections and gone home. She was alone. Her feet carried her toward the piano before she could stop them. She sat down on the bench. The leather was cool against her legs. Her hands, rough and dry from years of cleaning chemicals, hovered over the keys. She did not touch them. She just looked at them, white and black, simple and perfect. 40 years ago, those same hands had made people cry. They had made people stand up from their seats and clap until their palms turned red. They had created something beautiful out of nothing but air and wooden hammers and stretched strings. 40 years ago, Renata Molina had been someone else entirely. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. She was born in Havana, Cuba, in a small house with blue shutters and a mango tree in the backyard. Her father was a fisherman. Her mother sold vegetables at the market. They had very little money, but they had music. There was always music. Her grandmother had an old piano in her living room. It was out of tune and missing 2 keys. But to young Renata, it was magic. She would sit at that piano for hours, picking out melodies she heard on the radio. Her grandmother would watch her and smile and say nothing. But one day, when Renata was 7 years old, her grandmother took her hand and led her to the home of a woman named Professora Vidal. Professora Vidal was strict and serious and never smiled. But she knew music like she knew her own heartbeat. She listened to little Renata play for 5 minutes. Then she looked at her grandmother and said 3 words that changed everything. She has it. From that day on, Renata studied piano like her life depended on it. And in some ways, it did. Music became her escape from the small house and the hard life, and the feeling that the world had already decided what she would become. Music told her she could be something more. By the time she was 20, Renata had won competitions across the country. By 23, she made her debut at the Gran Teatro de la Habana, the most famous concert hall in Cuba. She played Chopin that night. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted 7 minutes. Her mother cried in the front row. Her father, who did not understand classical music at all, clapped the hardest of anyone. For the next 10 years, Renata traveled and performed and lived the life she had always dreamed of. She played for presidents and ambassadors. She played in concert halls across Europe and South America. Critics called her gifted. They called her extraordinary. They said her hands could speak directly to the human soul. And then, life happened. She fell in love with a man named Aurelio. He was kind and gentle and made her laugh like no one else could. They got married in a small church, with flowers in her hair and hope in her heart. They had a daughter, then a son. Renata kept playing, but less often now. Her children needed her. Her family needed her. When her son was 12 years old, Aurelio got sick. The doctors said it was his heart. He needed surgery. Expensive surgery. The kind of surgery that cost more money than they had ever seen in their lives. Renata sold everything. Her jewelry, her awards, even her piano, the beautiful instrument she had saved for years to buy. It was not enough. They made a decision together. She and Aurelio. They would go to America. They had heard there were better doctors there. More opportunities. They would start over. They would find a way. The journey was hard. Renata did not like to think about it. They arrived with almost nothing. Their degrees and certificates meant little here. Aurelio was too sick to work. The children were young and scared and needed things that cost money. So Renata did what she had to do. She took the first job she could find. She became a cleaner at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Aurelio had his surgery. It helped for a while. But 3 years later, his heart gave out anyway. He died on a Tuesday morning, holding Renata's hand, telling her he was sorry he could not stay longer. That was 8 years ago. The children were grown now. Her daughter was a nurse. Her son was studying engineering. They had good lives, successful lives. Renata had made sure of that. She had scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets and emptied trash cans so that her children would never have to. She did not regret it, not for one moment. But sometimes, late at night, when the hotel was empty and quiet, she let herself remember who she used to be. She let herself feel the ghost of the music still living inside her fingers. She let herself miss it. Tonight was one of those nights. Renata opened her eyes and looked at the piano keys in front of her. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed one key. Just one. Very softly. The note floated up into the empty ballroom and disappeared. It was the most beautiful sound she had heard in years. She pulled her hands back quickly. No. She could not do this. She was a cleaning woman now. That was who she was. The other Renata, the one who played for presidents, that woman was gone. She had died somewhere along the way, buried under years of hard work and survival. Renata stood up from the piano bench. She smoothed down her uniform. She picked up her mop, but as she walked away, she could feel the piano watching her, waiting. As if it knew something she had forgotten, as if it knew that her story was not over yet. 3 weeks passed after that night with the piano. Renata tried to forget about it. She went back to her routine. Wake up at 5 in the morning. Take the bus to work. Clean the rooms. Mop the floors. Go home. Sleep. Do it all again. But something had changed inside her. That single note she had played kept echoing in her mind. It followed her through the hallways. It whispered to her when she polished the tables. It kept her awake at night when she should have been sleeping. She started finding excuses to walk past the ballroom, even when she did not need to clean it. She would slow down near the door and look at the piano through the glass, just for a moment, just to see it sitting there, waiting. One night, she could not help herself. The hotel was quiet. Everyone had gone home. She slipped into the ballroom and sat at the piano again. This time, she did not stop at one note. She played a simple melody, something soft and gentle, a lullaby her grandmother used to hum. Her fingers remembered the keys like old friends. She did not know that someone was watching her. His name was Tomas. He was 24 years old and worked as a waiter at the hotel restaurant. He had come to America from the Dominican Republic when he was 16, and he knew what it meant to start over with nothing. He worked double shifts to send money home to his mother. He was tired most of the time, but he never let it show. Tomas had been walking to the staff room to get his jacket when he heard the music. At first, he thought someone had left a radio on. But then he realized it was coming from the ballroom. He walked closer, curious, and stopped in the doorway. What he saw made him hold his breath. The old cleaning lady, the one who always kept to herself, the one whose name he did not even know, was sitting at the grand piano. And she was playing like nothing he had ever heard before. The music filled the room like water filling a glass. It was sad and beautiful and alive. Tomas did not move. He did not want to break the spell. He just stood there and listened until she finished. When Renata stopped playing, She sat very still for a moment. Then she stood up, turned around, and saw him. Her face went pale. She looked like a child caught stealing cookies. "Please," she said quickly, "please do not tell anyone. I should not have. I will go now." She tried to walk past him, but Tomas stepped forward. "Wait," he said. How do you play like that?" Renata shook her head. "It is nothing. Just something I used to do a long time ago. Please forget you saw this." But Tomas could not forget. Over the next few weeks, he found himself looking for her around the hotel. He learned her name was Renata. He learned she had been working here for 11 years. He learned she always ate lunch alone in the corner of the staff room, reading old books in Spanish. One night, he brought her coffee. She looked surprised, like no one had done something kind for her in a very long time. They started talking. Slowly, carefully, she began to tell him about her life. About Cuba. About the concerts. About Aurelio and the children and everything she had given up. Tomas listened without interrupting. When she finished, he shook his head slowly. "You are not a cleaning lady," he said. "You are an artist. You just forgot." Renata smiled sadly. "That woman died a long time ago, Mijo. I am just Renata now. The one who mops the floors." Tomas did not argue with her, but he did not believe her either. 2 months later, the hotel announced a big event. The annual charity gala for the City Arts Foundation. It was the most important night of the year. Wealthy donors from all over the country would attend. There would be speeches and auctions, and a performance by a famous pianist who was flying in from New York. The entire staff was working extra hours to prepare. Renata scrubbed the ballroom until the floors sparkled like mirrors. She polished the chandeliers until they glowed. She made sure every corner was perfect. The night of the gala arrived, the ballroom filled with people in expensive suits and beautiful gowns. Diamonds sparkled on necks and wrists. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. Everything was going exactly as planned. And then, 1 hour before the performance, disaster struck. The pianist from New York called. His flight had been canceled because of a storm. He was stuck at the airport with no way to get there in time. He was very sorry. But there was nothing he could do. The event manager, a tall woman named Mrs. Caldwell, nearly collapsed when she heard the news. The piano performance was supposed to be the highlight of the evening. The donors had paid thousands of dollars for their seats. How could she tell them there would be no music? She gathered her team in the hallway behind the ballroom. Panic was written all over their faces. "Does anyone know a pianist?" she asked desperately. "Anyone at all? Someone who can play classical music at a professional level?" The staff looked at each other. No one spoke. Tomas was standing near the back of the group, holding a tray of empty glasses. His heart was pounding in his chest. He thought about Renata. He thought about the music he had heard that night. He thought about what she had said, about the woman who had died a long time ago. Maybe that woman was not dead. Maybe she was just sleeping. Before he could stop himself, Tomas raised his hand. "I know someone," he said. "Mrs. Caldwell turned to him with desperate hope in her eyes. "Who? Where are they?" Tomas pointed across the room. Everyone turned to look. Renata was standing near the service entrance, wearing her cleaning uniform, pushing her cart of supplies. She had no idea what was happening. She was just doing her job, like she always did. Tomas said. "She can play." For a moment, there was complete silence. Then someone laughed. It was one of the assistant managers. A young man with a fancy watch and perfectly styled hair. He covered his mouth quickly, but the damage was done. "The cleaning lady," Mrs. Caldwell said slowly. "You want the cleaning lady to perform for the City Arts Foundation?" More laughter rippled through the group. The security guard chuckled and shook his head. One of the waitresses whispered something to her friend, and they both giggled. Tomas felt his face grow hot. "I am serious," he said. "I have heard her play. She is incredible. Better than anyone I have ever heard." Mrs. Caldwell looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Young man, I appreciate your creativity, but this is not a joke. We have governors and CEOs out there. We cannot put a cleaning woman on that stage. Why not? Tomas asked. Because of her uniform? Because she mops floors? That does not change what she can do. Ah, the assistant manager laughed again. This is ridiculous. Someone call around to the music schools. There has to be a student or a professor who can fill in, but Mrs. Caldwell held up her hand. She was looking at Renata now, studying her. Something in her expression changed. Bring her here, she said quietly. Tomas felt his heart skip. He walked across the room to where Renata was working. She looked up at him with confusion in her eyes. What is wrong? She asked. You look strange. Renata, he said softly. They need a pianist. The color drained from her face. You did what? Please, Tomas said. Just come and talk to them. Just let them hear you play. You do not have to do anything you do not want to do. But this could be your chance. The chance you never got. Renata stared at him. Her hands were gripping the handle of her cart so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I cannot, she whispered. I am nobody. Look at me. I am wearing a cleaning uniform. My hands smell like bleach. Those people out there. They will laugh at me. Let them laugh, Tomas said. And then show them who you really are. I'm Tomasar. Tomasar. Renata looked toward the ballroom. She could hear the noise of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of expensive conversations. Those people lived in a different world than her. They had never scrubbed a toilet in their lives. They had never worked double shifts to pay for medicine. They had never sold everything they loved just to survive. But once, a long time ago, she had stood on stages just like this one. She had made people like them rise to their feet and weep. She let go of her cart. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Take me to them. The hallway behind the ballroom felt like it was 100 miles long. Renata walked beside Tomas. Her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her legs felt weak. Her mouth was dry. Every step brought her closer to something she was not sure she could face. Mrs. Caldwell was waiting for them with her arms crossed. The other staff members stood in a small group behind her, watching. Some of them were still smiling, like this was all a big joke. The assistant manager with the fancy watch was whispering something to the security guard. They both laughed quietly. Renata stopped in front of Mrs. Caldwell. She felt small in her cleaning uniform. There was a stain on her sleeve from the bathroom she had cleaned earlier. Her shoes were old and worn. She could smell the cleaning chemicals on her own skin. So, Mrs. Caldwell said, looking her up and down. Tomas here says you can play piano. Renata nodded slowly. I used to play. A long time ago. How long ago? 30 years. Maybe more. Mrs. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. 30 years. And where did you play? At church? At family parties? Renata hesitated. She did not like to talk about her past. It felt like bragging. And she had nothing to brag about anymore. But Tomas gave her a small nod, encouraging her to speak. I played at the Gran Teatro de la Habana, she said quietly. I performed in concert halls in Europe, in South America. I played for presidents and ambassadors. Gay, the smiles faded from some of the faces in the group. Mrs. Caldwell's expression changed slightly. You are serious, she said. Yes. Mrs. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. She looked at her watch, then back at Renata. The clock was ticking. The guests were waiting. There was no other option. Can you play Chopin? She asked. Something classical, something impressive. Renata thought of the Ballade No. 1-inch G minor. She had played it at her debut in Havana, all those years ago. It was one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. Her fingers had not touched those notes in decades. Yes, she heard herself say. I can play Chopin. Mrs. Caldwell took a deep breath. Fine. You have one chance. If you freeze up or make a fool of yourself out there, it is on you. Understand? Renata nodded. Good. Go clean yourself up. You have 15 minutes. In the staff bathroom, Renata stood in front of the mirror and stared at her reflection. Who was this woman looking back at her? Gray hair pulled back in a messy bun. Deep lines around her eyes. Hands that were rough and cracked from years of hard work. This was not the woman who had played for presidents. This was not the woman who had made audiences weep. This was just Renata, the cleaning lady from the Grand Meridian Hotel. What was she doing? What had she agreed to? She turned on the faucet and washed her hands slowly, watching the water run over her fingers. She thought about Aurelio. She wondered what he would say if he could see her now. He had always believed in her, even when she stopped believing in herself. On the nights when she came home exhausted and defeated, he would hold her hand and remind her of who she used to be. You are still that woman, he would say. She is still inside you. She is just resting. Renata closed her eyes. She could almost hear his voice, soft and warm, like it was right beside her. Okay, mi amor, she whispered to the empty bathroom. I will try. For you. She dried her hands and fixed her hair as best she could. She straightened her uniform. There was nothing she could do about the stain on her sleeve, so she stopped worrying about it. She looked at herself one more time in the mirror, then she walked out to face the crowd. The ballroom was even more terrifying than she remembered. Hundreds of people filled the space, dressed in gowns and suits that probably cost more than she made in a year. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above their heads. Waiters moved through the crowd like shadows, carrying silver trays, and in the corner, sitting under a soft spotlight, was the piano. Mrs. Caldwell appeared at her side. We will announce you as a special surprise guest, she said quickly. Do not mention that you work here. Just walk to the piano and play. Do you understand? Renata nodded, even though she was not sure she understood anything anymore. A man in a tuxedo stepped onto the small stage near the piano. He tapped the microphone, and the room slowly grew quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with a big smile, we have a very special surprise for you this evening. Due to unexpected circumstances, our scheduled performer could not be with us tonight, but we are honored to present a remarkable artist who has graced stages around the world. Please welcome our guest pianist. He gestured toward Renata. She did not move. Her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Tomas appeared beside her. You can do this, he whispered. I believe in you. Renata took a step forward. Then another. Then another. The walk to the piano was the longest walk of her life. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room turning to look at her. She could see the confusion on their faces. This was not what they expected. They expected someone glamorous, someone polished, someone who looked like they belonged on a stage. Instead, they got an old woman in a cleaning uniform with a stain on her sleeve. The whispers started almost immediately. She could not hear the exact words, but she could feel them. She could see a woman in a red dress lean over to her husband and say something behind her hand. She could see a man in the front row frown and shake his head. She could see a young couple exchange glances and smirk. A woman near the aisle, dripping in pearls and diamonds, did not even bother to whisper. Her voice was loud enough for Renata to hear as she passed. Is this a joke? Did they really bring the cleaning lady to play for us? Someone laughed. Then someone else. The sound spread through the room like ripples on water. Renata kept walking. Her face was burning. Her eyes were stinging, but she kept walking. She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. The laughter had faded, but the murmurs continued. She could feel the doubt in the room. She could feel the pity. She could feel all of them looking at her and seeing nothing but an old woman who had made a terrible mistake. She sat down on the bench. The leather was cool against her legs, just like it had been that night when she played alone in the empty ballroom. But this was different. This time, hundreds of people were watching. This time, everything was at stake. She looked down at the keys. White and black. Simple and perfect. The same keys she had touched 1,000 times before. Her hands were trembling. She could hear the whispers growing louder. She could feel the impatience in the room. Someone coughed. Someone else sighed. The woman in pearls said something that made her friends laugh again. Renata closed her eyes. Suddenly, She was not in the Grand Meridian Hotel anymore. She was 23 years old, standing backstage at the Gran Teatro de la Habana. She was wearing a blue dress that her mother had sewn by hand. Her father was in the audience, nervous and proud. Her grandmother was watching from somewhere above, smiling down at her, and Aurelio was there too. Young and healthy and full of life. He was holding her hand and telling her that she was going to be magnificent. "Show them who you are," he whispered in her memory. "Show them all." Renata opened her eyes. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play. The first note rose into the air like a question. It was soft, almost shy, the kind of sound that made you lean forward without realizing it. The second note followed. Then the third. Then more. Falling like raindrops at the start of a storm. Renata's fingers moved across the keys, and something shifted in the room. The whispers did not stop right away. People were still looking at each other, still waiting for her to make a mistake, still expecting this to be the embarrassment they thought it would be. But the music did not care what they expected. The opening passage of Chopin's Ballade. No. 1-inch G minor is gentle and searching. It wanders like someone walking through a forest at night, looking for a path they cannot quite find. Renata played it the way she had learned to play it 40 years ago, not just with her fingers, but with her whole body. Her shoulders swayed slightly, her eyes were half closed, her breath moved with the rhythm of the notes. By the 8th bar, the first whisper died. By the 16th bar, conversation stopped mid-sentence. By the 30th bar, the entire ballroom was silent. The woman in pearls, the one who had laughed the loudest, was now sitting completely still. Her champagne glass was frozen halfway to her lips. Her mouth was slightly open. She was staring at Renata like she was seeing a ghost. The man in the front row who had frowned and shaken his head was no longer frowning. He had leaned forward in his chair, his hands gripping his knees, his eyes locked on the piano. Even Mrs. Caldwell, who was standing near the back wall with her clipboard pressed against her chest, had stopped breathing. The music grew stronger now. The gentle questioning of the opening gave way to something deeper, something more urgent. Renata's hands danced across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone her age. The notes tumbled over each other, rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks. This was not just a performance. This was a story, and everyone in that room could feel it. The Ballade in G minor is not a happy piece. Chopin wrote it when he was far from home, longing for a country he could never return to. It is full of beauty, yes, but also sadness, also loss, also the kind of pain that lives deep in your bones and never quite goes away. Renata understood that pain. She had lived it. As she played, she was not thinking about the notes on a page. She was not counting beats or worrying about technique. She was remembering. She remembered her grandmother's living room, with the old piano missing 2 keys. She remembered the smell of mangoes from the tree in the backyard. She remembered her mother's hands, rough from work, brushing the hair from her face before her first recital. The music swelled, and she remembered Aurelio. The way he smiled. The way he danced with her in the kitchen when there was no music playing. The way he held her hand in the hospital and told her not to cry. Her fingers struck the keys harder now, pulling sounds from the piano that made people in the audience shift in their seats. The melody climbed higher and higher, reaching for something just out of grasp. She remembered the day she sold her piano. The man who bought it did not even know what it was worth. He just wanted something pretty for his daughter to practice on. Renata had watched them carry it out of her apartment, and she had felt like they were carrying away a piece of her soul. The music softened again, dropping into a passage so tender and sad that it hurt to listen to. A woman in the 3rd row wiped her eyes. A man near the back turned away so no one would see him crying. This was what Renata had forgotten. This was what she had buried under years of survival. Music was not just sound. It was a language that spoke directly to the heart. It did not care about uniforms or job titles, or how much money you had. It only cared about truth, and Renata was telling the truth now. Maybe for the first time in 30 years. The piece entered its final section. This was the most difficult part. the part that separated good pianists from great ones. The notes came faster and faster, demanding impossible things from her hands. Her fingers flew across the keys in patterns that looked almost inhuman. Tomas was standing near the service entrance, his empty tray hanging forgotten at his side. He had tears running down his face, but he did not bother to wipe them away. He was watching Renata transform in front of his eyes. The tired old woman who ate lunch alone in the corner of the staff room was gone. In her place was someone extraordinary. Someone luminous. Someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The music built to its climax. The piano seemed to shake with the power of it. Every note was a cry, a prayer, a declaration that she was still here, that she had survived, that all those years of sacrifice and silence had not destroyed her. She was still the woman who had played for presidents. She was still the woman who had made audiences weep. She had just forgotten for a while. The final passage arrived. It was thunderous, triumphant, like a storm breaking open the sky. Renata's hands came down on the keys with everything she had. The sound filled the ballroom, bounced off the chandeliers, shook the champagne in the glasses. And then, with one last powerful chord, it was over. Renata's hands lifted from the keys and came to rest in her lap. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. It was as if the entire room had been hypnotized, frozen in place by something they could not explain. The music had stopped, but its echoes still hung in the air, still pressed against their chests, still whispered in their ears. Renata sat very still at the piano bench. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking. She did not know if she had played well or terribly. She did not know if she had made a fool of herself or redeemed herself. She only knew that she had given everything she had. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched on, second after second, until it became almost unbearable. Renata felt her stomach drop. Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe it was not enough. Maybe 30 years away from the piano had stolen something from her that she could never get back. She started to stand up, ready to walk away, ready to disappear back into her invisible life. And then, from somewhere in the front row, a single person began to clap. It was slow at first, uncertain, just one pair of hands breaking the silence. Then another person joined, then another, then 10 more. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted. The applause hit Renata like a wave. It was loud and overwhelming, and everywhere at once. People were rising from their seats, one by one, then in groups, then all together. Chairs scraped against the floor. Champagne glasses were set down on tables. Hands came together again and again and again. The woman in pearls was standing now, clapping so hard that her jewelry rattled against her wrists. Tears were streaming down her face. The man in the front row was on his feet, shaking his head in disbelief, applauding like his life depended on it. They were all standing, every single person in that room, for her, for the cleaning lady in the stained uniform, for Renata. She sat at the piano bench, unable to move, unable to think. The sound of their applause washed over her like warm water, filling all the empty spaces inside her that she had carried for so long. And for the first time in 30 years, Renata Molina began to cry. The applause would not stop. Renata sat at the piano bench, tears falling down her cheeks, while hundreds of people stood and clapped for her. The sound filled the ballroom like thunder. It echoed off the walls and the chandeliers and the tall windows. It surrounded her completely, and she did not know what to do with it. She had forgotten what this felt like. She had forgotten how it felt to be seen. Slowly, she stood up from the bench. Her legs were shaking. She turned to face the crowd, and the applause grew even louder. People were cheering now. Some of them were calling out words she could not hear over the noise. Others were wiping their eyes and clapping at the same time. The woman in pearls pushed through the crowd to reach her. Up close, Renata could see that her makeup was ruined from crying. Her eyes were red and swollen. "I am so sorry," the woman said, her voice breaking. "I said terrible things. I did not know. I am so sorry." Renata looked at her for a long moment. This woman had laughed at her. This woman had made her feel small and worthless. But standing here now, with tears on both their faces, Renata saw something she had not expected. She saw shame. She saw regret. She saw a woman who had learned something important tonight. Renata reached out and took her hand. "It is okay," she said softly. "You did not know. How could you know?" The woman squeezed her hand tightly, then stepped back into the crowd. After that, everything became a blur. People surrounded Renata from all sides. They shook her hand. They hugged her. They pressed business cards into her fingers and spoke words that did not quite make sense to her overwhelmed mind. A tall man with gray hair and kind eyes introduced himself as the director of the Arts Foundation. He said he had never heard anything so beautiful in all his years of organizing this event. He asked if she would consider performing at their winter concert at Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall. The words sounded like a dream. A woman in a blue dress said she worked for a record company. She wanted to talk about making an album. She wanted to share Renata's music with the world. A young man with glasses said he was a journalist. He wanted to write her story. He wanted everyone to know about the cleaning lady who silenced a room full of millionaires. Renata nodded and smiled and said yes to everything, even though she was not sure what she was agreeing to. It was all too much, too fast, too big. And then, through the crowd, she saw Tomas. He was standing near the back of the room, still holding his empty serving tray. He was not pushing forward like everyone else. He was just watching her with a small smile on his face. His eyes were still wet from the tears he had cried during her performance. Renata excused herself from the people surrounding her and walked toward him. The crowd parted to let her through. When she reached him, she did not say anything at first. She just stood there, looking at this young man who had changed her life. "Thank you," she finally said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself." Tomas shook his head. "I did not do anything. You did this. All of this was inside you the whole time. I just reminded you to look." Renata smiled through her tears. She reached out and hugged him tightly. He hugged her back, and for a moment, in the middle of that crowded ballroom full of wealthy strangers, they were just two immigrants who understood what it meant to sacrifice everything and start again. The next few months moved quickly. True to his word, the Arts Foundation director invited Renata to perform at Carnegie Hall. She played the same Chopin ballade she had played at the hotel, and once again, the audience rose to their feet. But this time, she was not wearing a cleaning uniform. This time, she wore a beautiful black dress that her daughter had helped her pick out. This time, her children were sitting in the front row, crying and clapping, and looking at their mother like they were seeing her for the first time. The journalist wrote his article. It was published in a major newspaper and shared thousands of times online. People all over the world read about Renata Molina, the Cuban concert pianist who had given up everything for her family, who had spent 11 years invisible, who had silenced a room full of doubters, with nothing but her hands and a piano. Letters started arriving at her apartment. Emails flooded in from addresses she did not recognize. People wrote to tell her that her story had inspired them. They wrote to say they had cried reading about her. They wrote to say they had their own dreams they had given up. And her story made them want to try again. The record company woman kept her promise too. 6 months after the gala, Renata released her first album. She recorded it in a studio in New York City, playing pieces she had learned as a young woman in Havana, Chopin, Beethoven, Debussy, and one original composition she wrote herself, a soft and gentle melody that reminded her of mangoes and blue shutters and her grandmother's smile. She called the album Invisible No More. It was not a huge commercial success. Renata did not become a celebrity or a millionaire, but it sold enough copies to let her quit her cleaning job. It sold enough to let her rent a small studio where she could teach piano to children who could not afford lessons. It sold enough to let her live comfortably, doing what she loved, for whatever years she had left. And that was more than enough. On the 1-year anniversary of the gala, Renata returned to the Grand Meridian Hotel. Not as a performer this time. Not as a guest. She came back because she wanted to see the ballroom one more time. It was empty when she arrived, just like it had been on all those nights when she used to play alone after everyone went home. The chandeliers sparkled above her head. The tall windows showed the city lights glowing soft and gold. And in the corner, waiting for her like an old friend, was the piano. She walked over to it and sat down on the bench. Her hands rested on the keys, but she did not play. Not yet. She just sat there, remembering everything. The mop and the cleaning cart. The late nights and the aching back. The years of being invisible. The laughter and the doubt. And the longest walk of her life. And then she thought of Aurelio. She could almost feel him sitting beside her on the bench. She could almost hear his voice, soft and warm, telling her he was proud of her. Telling her he always knew she would find her way back to the music. Telling her that he loved her and that he was watching and that he would never really be gone. "I did it, mi amor," she whispered to the empty room. "I finally did it." A tear rolled down her cheek, but she was smiling. Then Renata Molina placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play. The music rose into the empty ballroom and filled every corner. It floated up to the chandeliers and out through the windows and into the night. It was soft and beautiful and full of everything she had ever felt. And somewhere, somehow, she knew that Aurelio could hear it. This time, she was not playing for presidents or millionaires or standing ovations. She was playing for him. She was playing for herself, and she was never going to stop.